As an introduction, we'd like to acknowledge that our mission at Vose Library is to advance learning, inspire curiosity, enrich lives, and promote community. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce our guest. Laura Swami Lecker is the Education and Outreach Coordinator and longtime volunteer with Avian Haven, and also the Technical Director at Somerset County Soil and Water Conservation District, where she does a variety of bird-related programs. And without further ado, there's her famous owl photo that you've seen in the newspaper, but I'm going to stop sharing and put Laura in speaker view, and there you go, Laura. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to, Deborah and I were just talking beforehand. Husband and I used to live in Union, and Vose Library was one of our favorite haunts. Let's see if I can get this, but there we go, full screen. So I'm really happy to be here tonight and always excited to talk about Avian Haven. So for those of you who aren't aware, Avian Haven is a wild bird rehabilitation center that is located in Freedom, Maine. And they are strictly a rehab center. They don't have an educational component to their mission. So they're open for the public in terms of taking birds, but they can't accommodate, people coming for tours and that kind of thing, because the mission of Avian Haven is to get every one of the birds that come to them back out into the wild. So if you haven't before looked at Avian Haven's awesome Facebook page that's run by Selkie O'Meara, I would highly recommend that you do. There's lots of great information, and it's a great way to kind of see what's going on at Avian Haven. And they also have a really nice website that has some great resources. So you're looking at the managers and founders of Avian Haven right here, Mark Payne and Diane Wynn. Took it from a really small, like 30 birds a year facility to its exponential growth that's happened over the last years. As the name implies, they do specialize in birds, and their caseload is the highest in northern New England for birds. They have quite an impressive center with their infirmary and their outside pre-release cages, and community support is something that one, makes Avian Haven unique, and two, is really a key component to why Avian Haven is successful at doing what they are trying to do. So the community support comes in a couple of different flavors. We have some amazing veterinary support. Dr. Judy Herman has been on the board of Avian Haven for many years now, and she does some of the surgeries that are needed and that sort of thing. She has her own veterinary practice in Augusta. Dr. Steve Whitkin is a human eye guy, and he volunteers his time for cases where there are eye injuries and that sort of thing. So we really, really appreciate his help. And Dr. Mark Pokris was at the Tufts School of Veterinary Medicine for much of his career. And he did particularly a 30-year study on loon health. And he has since retired from Tufts, and he retired to Maine, which is very exciting because now we have him kind of in our backyard. He assists with and consults with Avian Haven folks about a lot of different cases. So we're really fortunate to have him. The other thing we're really fortunate to have is our interns and volunteers. There are interns and volunteers on site year round, particularly in the summer. That's when things get really crazy at Avian Haven. And the thing that is really unique about Avian Haven is that they have a cadre of volunteer drivers stretching from north to south. And those volunteer drivers bring injured birds to Avian Haven. So that is something that a lot of other rehab centers don't have, but is a reason that Avian Haven is able to take care of as many birds as they do. So, and that is how my husband and I started with Avian Haven, is we started by being volunteer drivers, and we're still volunteer drivers. That's how we got started anyway. So I mentioned they started, Avian Haven started by admitting about 30 birds a year, and last year they did about 3,500 birds. The most common reasons that birds are admitted to Avian Haven are cat predation, car collisions, and window strikes. So kind of put that in the back of your mind, because we'll come back and talk about that in a little bit. But something you might not be aware of is that Avian Haven also takes reptiles. It's mostly in the form of car hit turtles. You may or may not know that turtles like to lay their eggs in gravel, and so the road edges look particularly attractive to them for that purpose. And they often get into trouble with cars while they're doing this. So here's just a quick look at some of the non-avian residents that have come into Avian Haven. Up here in the top left-hand corner is a big snapping turtle who's getting her jaw sutured. You can see that pin holding her jaw open, but I'm still glad those aren't my fingers that are doing the suturing there. And I used to personally think that a cracked shell on a turtle was a death sentence, and that is not necessarily the case. You can see in the top middle photo here, Avian Haven has a lot of different sorts of things that they can kind of caulk the shell together with. So, you know, depending on what the injuries are, they can kind of patch that back together. And I've seen some turtles that were in pretty bad shape make a pretty amazing recovery. So if you find those turtles and you're not sure if it's salvageable or not, it's always a good thing to call Avian Haven and see if you can get them up there. And when they get in female turtles that don't survive, but their egg sac is still intact, usually that's Mark's job at Avian Haven, is to remove the egg sac and then incubate the eggs until later in the summer. We get a whole bunch of these little guys like in the upper right hand corner, which we can then release. So that's pretty fun, the days that they hatch out, because they're really cool. And in the lower left hand corner, we also sometimes get in amphibians. This was a toad who's somebody inadvertently set a basketball hoop on it without realizing that it was there. And again, I think that was Mark who did that splint to hold the bones together while they knitted, which was a pretty delicate surgery. But and then you can see also sometimes Avian Haven will get snakes in. Usually they're hit by car casualties as well. So at any given time, there might be any of these guys there. And a day at Avian Haven, once the phone starts ringing and people start coming in, you never know what the day is going to look like. But here's a little sort of vignette of some of the things that occur on a pretty regular basis at Avian Haven. This great horned owl in the upper right-hand corner is getting tubed an electrolyte solution or fluids. And they like to do this for birds that come in that are really down and out, or might be very injured. This rehydrates them. So that's going to make them immediately feel better. And usually that if a bird is down and out, that's what happens. And then the bird is put to rest in a hospital cage for a little bit before they try to do any other diagnostic work, to kind of just let them settle in. So that is a pretty common thing. This peregrine falcon in the middle is sporting a wing wrap. We do lots of wing wraps at Avian Haven. The wrap there stabilizes the bones so that they can heal back together properly, and they aren't going to be banging it around. And so that we do lots and lots of those. And then another thing I mentioned, the cat predation wound cleansing, like this woodcock in the upper right hand corner. There's a lot of that goes on as well. Birds get wounds, of course, from other things also, but it's really important to keep those clean and to make sure that they're healing correctly. So there's lots of that goes on. Another thing that happens on a pretty regular basis is like this northern gannet down here in the lower left hand corner. baths. Birds are often getting into sticky things, all kinds of different substances that they may end up in, or they may just have lost their waterproofing. So a dawn bath is in order in these cases, and the birds generally don't love the bath part. You can see that gannet doesn't really look all that happy about being in the bath, but usually they do like the end part, which is this blow dry that you see down here in the lower right-hand corner, and then the time in the heated cage afterwards. So they usually like that part much better. So we're just we're shifting gears from sort of winter mode to early spring mode now. But during the winter, a lot of Avian Haven's guests are owls of different sorts. Again, these guys are normally found hunting along the road edges. People throw garbage out, and then you have rodents that are out there scavenging the garbage. And the owls have figured out that there are mice and other rodents along the edge of roadside. So they're out hunting, and they quite often get into trouble with cars while they're out there. And of course, we end up also with birds. We've had, I don't know how many owls who have somehow crash landed in manure pits and all kinds of other odd places. So it's not just with car strikes, but there are certainly a lot of car strikes. So we have a lot of owl guests. This past season, we had a lot of loons in at Avian Haven over the winter months, because long about December, when the loons usually are retiring to the coast for the winter, for whatever reason, some of these birds hung in on their breeding lakes longer than they should have. And loons need a pretty open space in order to get up the speed that they need to be able to take off. So once things started to ice in, gosh, we got loon calls from over a bunch of different lakes in Maine and even some lakes in New Hampshire. And you can see, do not try this at home. The folks that did these loon rescues on these iced-in lakes really need to be trained. A lot of them were volunteer fire department folks. There's also a loon rescue group that specifically trained for this sort of thing. So you have to have some pretty specific skills there. But I've lost track. I cannot remember how many loons Avian Haven got in over the winter, but it was quite a few. And as far as I know, all of them were either released, almost immediately, or they had a few things that they needed to be rehabbed for and had maybe a little longer stay. But generally they were turned around pretty quickly and released at the coast where they are supposed to be spending their winter. So then we're about to get into the craziest part of this season, which is summer baby season. And one of the things you may or may not know is that our songbirds need to be fed every hour during the day. So you can imagine, once we're starting to get in, Avian Haven might get in 40 birds in one day. So there's a lot of feeding that needs to happen at Avian Haven during the summer. And this is just a little video of what feeding time looks like for some of these are little goldfinches. So they are fed with a syringe, and they're fed basically a liquid food when they come in, and then as they get older, they graduate to more solid foods. Except this is feeding time for the American woodcock, which are some of our first babies of the spring usually. And they don't generally require syringe feeding, because this is what they would be doing in the wild. And you can see that it takes them a little while to figure out. Some of them have it right down. This poor one in the front really doesn't quite know what it's doing, but We go through a lot of earthworms when we have, it's almost every year that Avian Haven gets in woodcock babies, and they're a lot of fun. Ah, that one finally. There we go. So when young songbirds come in and they are still nestlings, they are kept in small, they're called reptariums, and they're soft-sided little tents that are really quite small because the babies wouldn't be leaving wouldn't be outside of the nest. So they're kept in a small area. And then as the birds fledge and are starting to move around and exercise their flight muscles, they're stepped up into larger and larger enclosures so that they can get that muscle tone that they need. You can see the large reptarium behind these waxwings. If you look really closely, you can see sitting on top of that stick that's on the bottom, there is a bobolink. So that gives you an idea of what the size of the reptarium is. This is one of the larger reptariums that the birds are put in sort of as the step before they go out into the pre-release cages. And as I mentioned, as the birds get older, they're hand fed with forceps, more solid foods, and then their food gets put in with them, and they basically then figure out how to feed themselves. And one day you unzip the reptarium and they all fly away from you because they've figured out how to do it themselves and don't want anything to do with us anymore, which is exactly what we want. So, so just to take a look at one of these outside pre-release cages, you can see in the back there are 3 osprey in this particular cage. So that gives you an idea of the size of that as well. And the pre-release cages are meant to help the birds acclimate to the outside temperature. You can see that screening, so it's open to the air, and to really give plenty of space for the birds to get their flying practice in before they are released. So not all of the help at Avian Haven is human. When there are birds that have injuries that make them non-releasable and they have a temperament that indicates that they might be interested in doing a foster stint, then they are kept on at Avian Haven. And you're looking at several of these foster parents that we have. This is great because, again, we're trying to reduce the amount of human contact that all these birds have, because, again, we're trying to get them out into the wild. We want them to stay wild. So being able to have Mr. and Mrs. Pumper, for example, our pigeon foster parents feed the babies, that's just great when we have that kind of a thing working for us. And this is just a little video of Ella, who is the mallard foster mom in residence. And she had a wing fracture, so that didn't heal well enough, so her flight isn't very good, so she's not releasable. But she just loved when managers put some babies in with her. So she's been on staff for a few years now. It's great. So here's a look at, again, some of those pre-release habitats. And this gentleman here in the middle had designed and built most of these habitats. That's Terry Heights, the plant manager for Avian Haven. And you can see the different habitats are kind of, all of them are intended for a particular species or group of species. We have a lot of different songbird habitats. We have an owl habitat. There's several large raptor habitats. This one in the bottom, you can see it's a circular flyway, which is particularly cool because it really allows for the birds to get good flying practice before there. You just have to be careful when you step in the door that, there's not a eagle that's, winging its way around. So this is, I've lost track of exactly how many pre-release cages are on at the facility now. There's a few more added all the time. This was a really important facility that was added back in 2012, I think. We call it the pool hall, but there's a big pool in the center and several smaller pools around it. It's a 4-season habitat, so there are birds out here all winter. It's heated, and you can see some of the guests that have stayed at the pool hall. And this is a quick video of feeding time at the pool hall. So as you can imagine, they go through quite a few fish during the season. This is a loon chick in one of the smaller pools that had just been given its first whole fish, and it was not exactly sure what to do with it, but she was having a good time with it anyway. There we go. So since my husband and I started volunteering, and over the years, there's been some information on a national level that's come out that, in my opinion, has taken bird conservation and rehab from a good thing to do to really a conservation imperative. And that is that we now know that we are losing birds at an alarming rate and have been since the 1970s. And the state of the birds, if you haven't looked it up, covers all the different habitats and different kinds of birds and what their conservation status is. A lot of it is pretty depressing reading, but the bright spot of the whole thing is that conservation works. And so we can do things that can make a difference and help these birds. So kind of going back to, again, what some of the reasons were that birds are coming into Avian Haven, that we can do something about. Certainly knowing that cat predation is one of the #1 reasons that birds end up at Avian Haven. Either they're orphaned, you know, the mother is killed and so the babies come into Avian Haven, or they're directly injured by cats and come into Avian Haven. But for all birds, certainly keeping cats indoors, especially during nesting season, or inside an enclosed fence. That's something that we can do. Certainly helpful for birds like the ovenbird and the woodcock that nest directly on the ground. They're very vulnerable to cat predation. But even the birds like this warbler nestling, you know, they may nest high up in a tree, but when the babies first fledge, they don't have the strength in their wings to be able to sustain flight very long. So they're going to spend quite a bit of time on the ground too. And they're of course vulnerable to cats at that point. So this is just a quick look at some of the, you know, you can go from very basic like that. That actually was when my husband and I were renting a place in Union. That you can go from very basic, just so the cats can get outside and enjoy the sunshine, to the Taj Mahal deal down here in the lower corner. And another thing you can always check out is this cat bib, which has been shown to prevent cats from pouncing on birds. So it looks kind of crazy, and I think that cat looks a little ticked off, but I've had so many people tell me, oh yeah, my cats, you know, they know they're going outside when they get their bib on and they're fine with it. So that's another option. And window strikes, of course, are another very common reason that birds are brought into Avian Haven. If you have this problem, I would encourage you to check out the American Bird Conservancy. They did research on a bunch of different products that claim to help reduce window strikes, and they rated them all in terms of how effective they were. So they also have a nice little handout. So I would encourage you to visit their website if you're interested in finding a way to reduce window strikes at your house or business or whatever. manage a program called Ag Allies, which is specifically looking at grassland birds. Their numbers are declining more sharply than most, and because they nest on the ground in hay fields, and they need undisturbed grass for raising their young. So of course, when folks are out mowing their fields, then these nests often get destroyed. So our program, I would just say this, that I would encourage you, if you have grasslands and are interested in finding a way to maybe make some space for these kinds of birds, I would be more than happy to talk about that and possibly do a site visit. The birds in the upper right-hand corner are bitterns, and they are a wading bird, but when there are fields that are somewhat near marshes, they will often nest actually right in the field too. In fact, last year when we were out setting out a block for bobolinks, we actually stumbled on a bittern nest, and Avian Haven gets them in almost every year because somebody accidentally mowed their nest. So just keeping an eye or a thought out about that is important. And leaving areas of grass standing, even if you don't have enough space for nesting grassland birds, like just leaving part of your lawn to grow into this, riotous mass of different wildflowers and that sort of thing is so beneficial to so many species. So that's something that anybody can do if they even have a small space of yard that they can sort of give over to wildlife habitat. So looking at woodland species, of course, when possible, avoiding cutting trees during nesting season is a great thing to do. These birds that you see on the screen all were brought into Avian Haven because somebody inadvertently cut down the tree that the nest was located in. And occasionally Avian Haven gets in a whole section. This is about a 3-foot section of tree that somebody brought in a couple of years ago because they cut it down and then heard a bunch of little sounds from within. And so the whole thing was brought into Avian Haven, and Avian Haven folks got their long-handled forceps and began the extraction. And we're able to pull out 5 beautiful little yellow-bellied sapsuckers who were very hungry, but otherwise unharmed. And they did really well at Avian Haven over the summer. And the upper right-hand corner there is the one that stayed around long enough for a photo on release day. So they did really well there. So looking to our water birds and predatory birds, as many of you probably know, birds can get poisoned by lead when eating either prey that was shot with lead bullets or lead shot, or when ingesting lead fishing gear. And there are a lot of species that can be affected by this sort of the excuse me, the ammunition poster child for lead poisoning are called eagles. Avian Haven has already had, I think, 5 in since the beginning of this year, birds that came in with lead poisoning. And lead affects every system in the body. So they can be presenting in a lot of different ways. It affects them cognitively. It affects their muscle tone. You can see this bird up in the upper corner here is not able to hold its head up. It can cause neurological problems like the bird in the upper right-hand corner. And you can see this X-ray down here in the lower right-hand corner. And you can see that that bird had ingested some pieces of lead shot. So the poster child for lead fishing tackle would have to be our loons. And they, as you probably know, they need to ingest gravel in order to help their gizzard grind up the fish bones that are part of their diet. And to do this, they dive to the bottom of lake or pond that they're on and scoop up a beak full of gravel. When they're doing that, sometimes if there's lead sinkers or jigs or that sort of thing that have been lost while fishing, they will end up ingesting those as well. They can also get lead ingest lead if they eat a fish that's attached to lead fishing gear that, when the line breaks and the fish swims away. So lead poisoning is the #1 cause of death in adult loons in the Northeast. And we know that from Mark Pokras's 30-year loon health study. So any lead poison bird are often generally in, noticeable distress. They may appear sleepy. Usually one of the last pieces of the lead poisoning illness is they start having respiratory distress. So we know that we're pretty close to the end by the time they get to that point. So you may ask, what does Avian Haven do when birds come in that we think might have lead poisoning? So the first thing managers will do there is to take an X-ray to see if there is still lead in the GI tract, and also to take a blood test to find out what the level of lead is in the blood. And if there's still lead in the actual GI tract, they are able to do this amazing procedure. It's quick. It's what you see these Mark and Shelley doing here. It's they place the bird at a downward angle. After putting the bird under general anesthesia, they insert a tracheal tube so the bird can continue breathing. And then they will insert a second tube down into the stomach and gizzard area that's got warm water flushing through it. And it's basically a stomach flush. And that black tray that you see there, they're watching so they can see when the lead piece is flushed out, so then they can be done with the flush. And it usually only takes a couple of minutes to do the flush. So even birds that are pretty down and out are able to withstand this procedure. So it's quick and easy. And then usually they'll start doing a chemical chelation to try to remove the lead from the bloodstream. Even so, the survival rate for loons is particularly low. I only know of a couple that have survived in my whole time that I've been volunteering with Avian Haven. The eagles do a little bit better, but their numbers are still pretty dismal. So prevention is definitely much better than trying to manage it once it's happened. So I would encourage any of you that are hunters to check out this huntingwithnonlead.org website. It's got a lot of great alternatives for different kinds of shot and bullets and that sort of thing. And most places now, because of Maine's beefed up law and a couple of other states that have lead tackle related laws, it's getting easier and easier to find non-lead fishing tackle in a lot of different places. So. And another thing that happens with fishing related injuries when folks leave behind either the fishing line or hooks and lures and that kind of thing, you can see that there's quite a few different bird species. Gulls are particularly hard hit here. You can see they get into trouble with these hooks, and the barred owl and the great blue heron down in the lower left-hand corner were both found hanging from a tree, entangled in fishing line. So again, it's just really important to, try to educate people and remind people to try to retrieve all of the fishing gear from your site and not leave it hanging around. Loons are also often get into trouble with this kind of issue. This is a loon. I think this one was from Solonsky Lake. I kind of lose track because this happens pretty regularly as well. But this bird, actually the entanglement, and since folks were able to retrieve the bird, turned out to be a good thing, because you can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's 2 lead sinkers that were ingested, but they didn't go very far because they were still attached to the fishing line that was wrapped around the bird's face. So they were able to haul the whole thing out and prevent lead poisoning, which was great. And in the lower right-hand corner is this bird being released after a short rehab stay. And that really small picture at the bottom is her mate that just kind of showed up out of nowhere when she was released. So that was a really pretty great story. This was something that happened last season, I think. This was a loon that got its feet tangled in some kind of fishing lure. Fortunately, even though the feet looked terrible, that they they did heal, and so she was released too. So switching gears to hummingbirds, who will be coming back pretty soon. Just a couple things that I wanted to mention here. There's no need for the red dye. That a lot of people sell that, thinking, and people think the red is necessary for the birds to be attractive, but the feeders themselves are attractive, and it's not necessary, and the coloring is not good for them. So you can easily make your own nectar by doing 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. And cleaning those feeders regularly is important, and leaving them out for the whole season. Even when and probably important to get them out. And I'm reminding myself that probably I should be doing that pretty soon, to get them out earlier than you might think, because again, they've made this long journey to get here, and leaving them out later in the season, even after you think maybe your hummingbirds have gone, there might be others that are coming through that will stop, and we really want them to be able to tank up before they make their long journey. So other things that you might not think of, again, I mentioned lots of baths. There's lots of sticky things that birds get into trouble with that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Different fly papers, this glue rodent trap that this eastern phoebe kind of did a face plant on. Again, just trying to think about where those things are and if there might be a possibility for birds to get caught. That phoebe actually ended up doing fine, but it was quite a process. She had to have solvent put on every single feather to slowly kind of lift her up off that glue, and then she needed a dawn bath to get rid of the solvent, and so it was quite a process. So some other things to be aware of, different kind of rodent poisons, ant poisons, that kind of thing. I mentioned euthanasia drugs. If sometimes farm animals are put down with euthanasia drugs. We had an eagle that had fed on a carcass that somebody had dragged out that had been killed with euthanasia drugs, and that bird got a lethal dose of whatever that drug was. This bird here had ingested a rat that had been killed with rat poison. And you can see the gruesome remains that I think Mark spent quite a lot of time, gets all the great jobs, Mark does, removing the contents of the bird's crop to try to get rid of as much of that poisoned rodent as possible. And I mean, the bird was almost comatose when it came in, and but you can see down in the lower right-hand corner, he made a remarkable recovery. So what Avian Haven does oftentimes is nothing short of heroic when you see some of the birds that come in and then are able to be released. Oftentimes birds end up coming down people's chimney. This is a kestrel that came in last year, I think, that had accidentally fallen down somebody's chimney. I know here at my house, we have bluebird boxes out around, and for 2 years in a row, we have ended up with juvenile. Once the juveniles fledged, they, I guess, would all go sit up on top on the rooftop, and one of them ended up 2 years in a row coming down our chimney. So we now leave our little clean out door open during the summer so that they aren't trapped in there. And last year I went down and found a juvenile bluebird sitting on the recycling bin. So something to be aware of. So now we can just and what to do if you find a bird that's in trouble. And the first thing is to try to get the bird out of immediate harm's way, remembering your own safety comes first. And that is your safety if you're handling a large bird, as well as being aware of traffic and all of that sort of thing. So that's the first thing, is being safe yourself. But if you don't have this number down here, I would, it's a good thing to have on your phone or your refrigerator or something, because you never know when you might have a situation. If you don't know what to do, you can always call them and ask. You can, explain what's going on. They are open 7 days a week. Their hours change a little bit from summer to winter, but again, they're open 7 days a week. So this is kind of large bird retrieval 101 here. This is Selkie O'Meara, the Facebook manager that I mentioned. She and her husband were retrieving an eagle that was down on the ground. And you can see these lovely long welder's gloves that she has on, and they've put a towel over the bird. And the thing you need to remember is the beak and the talons are what you want to, number one, keep away from your face. And number two, that's where you're going to get injured if, anywhere, if you don't have that under control. So having a towel over the bird is a great way to kind of just scoop them up without having to worry about that. And then securing the birds in a covered cardboard box. They like to suggest that you can use plastic carriers, but cardboard boxes are great because if the bird is flailing around or that sort of thing, it's soft. They're not going to hurt themselves. And putting some kind of towel or t-shirt or something in the bottom is important to give them something to hold on to if they're going to be driven in a car, as well as to kind of snuggle in. And especially birds like loons that have very delicate feet, having lots of thick padding there is pretty important. And if you find babies that don't have any feathers yet, they can't make their own warmth at that point. So they will need a supplemental heating source like a hot water bottle or a heating pad. So, oh, and I forgot that I wanted to also mention that if you have birds that strike a window and sometimes they'll kind of knock themselves out and you don't know, are they injured? Are they fine? Putting them in a fairly deep box, again, with that lining it with a towel or t-shirt in the bottom, and then covering it for half an hour or so, and then checking on the bird. The reason you want to put them in a deep box is, here's the test. You open the box, and if they can fly up and out, then they are fine. If they have come to and are moving around, but they can't get up and out of the box, quite often they'll have shoulder girdle injuries from striking a window. And that means that they can't get much vertical lift. So if they can't get out of the box, it's likely that they might have that shoulder girdle injury. So then that would be definitely an indication that you would want to get in touch with Avian. So now comes the reward of all of this hard work that's done with volunteers and all of the staff at Avian Haven, and that's the releases. And it makes all that hard work worthwhile. Finally, if you are interested in doing anything to help Avian Haven, here are some different ways that you can do it. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Wow, what a presentation. You are doing some phenomenal work. Thank you, thank you.
Well, I will definitely pass that along to the folks that are really doing the hard work right there at the center. So Mark and Diane, #1 on the list, of course.
All right, so I don't see anything in the chat. Please put your questions in there or unmute. We have about 10 minutes for questions and answers with Laura.
Hi, Laura. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. I used to have lots of chickadees and small birds in the back, and it's dwindled down in the last year, and this spring there aren't many at all. We have merlins that have been hanging around. And do owls eat chickadees too, or is there some other reason why the population decreased?
I mean, certainly the merlins would be interested in the chickadees, and an owl would, the big enough owls would take a chickadee if they were able to as well. But I know that over the last couple of years, a lot of people have reported seeing less birds out around, and I don't really know if anybody really knows why. But, part of it can depend on what the food sources are in the woods and whether or not, the birds are coming out to the feeders, or whether they've got plenty of food, right there in the woods where they might be, that sort of thing. But I know that a lot of people have said, that they aren't getting either the number of birds or the diversity of birds that they used to. And I don't want to think, but I'm afraid that part of that is, we're getting back to the fact that we're losing so many birds sort of nationwide for a variety of different reasons.
Right. Also, you mentioned at the beginning, but I can't remember what you said about visitors to Avian Haven. Are they welcome or not?
They aren't able to accommodate visitors, again, because all of the birds that come into Avian Haven, they're trying to rehab them, keep the human interaction to an absolute minimum, and then get the birds back out into the wild. So the way you do get to see birds at Avian Haven is if you sign up as a volunteer transporter, then you kind of get a behind the scenes look at what's going on there, which is pretty fun. So I would highly recommend that as a great way to, as a great way to be able to kind of see what goes on at Avian Haven firsthand. But I also learned so much from, just doing that simple act of my husband and I started out by, we were just handed a box and we would drive it, whatever leg that we were assigned. Sometimes, depending on where you are, they don't usually ask you to drive more than half an hour or whatever your comfort level is. But, if you volunteer to bring the bird all the way up to Avian Haven, you get to, be on site and see some of the birds. But it was a really great learning experience. We started, like I said, with the boxes, and then we'd end up with some assembly required rescues, which is, somebody would call and say, yeah, there's a great blue heron in the bushes over there that can't fly, or, that sort of thing. Or, there's a bird in my shed and that's injured itself, but I don't know how to get it out. And so it really has been quite a learning experience over the years. And I think a lot of Avian Haven volunteer transporters could probably write a pretty interesting book. So it's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Who has the next one? I don't know if you can.
Laura,
Oh, go right ahead, Steve.
thank you, Deborah. Wonderful presentation, Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My wife and I support Birdsacre in Ellsworth, but I had no idea that this Avian Haven existed. I think you thank you to you and for the wonderful work that the the organization does. So I had a question. When you
Sure.
receive, let's say, a newly hatched group of nestlings, I guess, my
Yeah.
term, without having parents to monitor and instruct, I just was curious as to their rate of survival.
It's pretty amazing that, you would think that, obviously the parents are really important, but there's a lot of instinct that kind of kicks in and takes over there too. Again, you would think, I sort of thought when I first started, we're hand feeding these birds. They're used to, people being right there every hour to feed them, and sometimes it takes a little while for them to accept feeding from us because they know right away that we're not mom. But the amazing thing to me is that, once they get to a point where they can start doing these things for themselves, that they really kind of revert back to wild. Like I said, it really is true that you might be feeding a group of baby robins who are all begging for you and you're feeding them happily. And then, the next day you go in, you unzip the enclosure ready to feed them, and they've kind of figured things out, and they all fly away from you, like, get away from me, because they figured out how to search and get their food themselves. And their survival rate is pretty good. So it's pretty amazing what that sort of those instincts, I think, kick in, even though they are raised in this case in not a natural environment. They still have those instincts.
Great. Thank you. I have another question, but it's not bird related, so I'll let everybody else ask their questions first.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And I was going to ask, do they ban birds that they rescue when they're released, so that if they don't make it or come across them again, they'll know that they had been there before?
That's a really good question. And so the birds are often banded at Avian Haven just internally, so we can keep track of who is who. Because again, when you've got 50 nestling robins, it's hard to keep track of who's who. So they're banded at the center, but those bands are removed before they are released.
Okay.
The bands that the birds leave with are ones that are mandated by either the state or the federal government. So like Inland Fish and Wildlife and US Fish and Wildlife often has Avian Haven banned the eagles and a lot of the hawks and that sort of thing, the loons. A lot of those birds are banded when they leave because the state has asked for that. So that is really nice, because sometimes sometimes Avian Haven will get in an eagle or a raptor or a loon, and they know that this bird has been here before because they're wearing that band, so they would have more information on those kind of birds, but the songbirds are usually not banded when they leave.
Right.
So again, we'd have a little better information on, survival rate and that sort of thing from those banded birds.
Laura, I don't know who will ask the next question, but I just wanted to point out that Dave and Karen put in the chat, Laura, we very much enjoyed your presentation. Thanks from your former union neighbors on the Hill, Karen and Dave Pula.
That's so nice. Hi, Dave and Karen. So, and again, to get kind of back to your question, Steve, about the survival rate, again, I can give you anecdotally, we released, again, I'm going to bring up the bluebirds that we have here. We released a bluebird female here, probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And she already knew how to get into the feeder to get live mealworms. So I know it was her. And she had a couple different males while she's been here, but she's been back every year since. And I know because she knows how to, she knows how to work that feeder, and so, you know, she did great once she was released, and she did come in as a nestling, so.
I guess
It's
bluebirds
pretty,
would be one of those that prompted my question.
Oh.
My sister and brother-in-law have had bluebird houses for some time, and
Yeah.
a couple of times we've been there to watch them, and they're very entertaining birds to watch. But
They're great.
they told us that the youngsters and the adults disappear for a week or two, go into the woods, and they've read, I guess, to receive further instruction, and then come back to the nest. So I was wondering, okay, if that's the case with bluebirds, they're getting that instruction from the parents. What about other birds, and what does it mean when that is missing? So I appreciate your answer to that question.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that they, you know, it's interesting too, even when they're out in the outside flight cages, you know, with bluebirds and other bug eating birds, they often will put live mealworms out with them, and you know, watching the birds kind of figure out how to, you know, search these bugs out and feed themselves is pretty amazing.
Sure.
They're pretty cool birds. So.
Yeah, they are. They are. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Laura, I think we're at the end of our time tonight. So again, I just want to thank you for this amazing presentation. Very, very informative. So many good tips for all of us who care about our environment and our wonderful wildlife. So thank you. And I'm going to just say that this concludes our presentation for this evening. And all of us at Vose Library, thank you for attending our Vose or Virtual Wednesday series. We hope that you'll spread the word and also join us next Wednesday, April 13th, when our very own Maine State Museum invites you to join us for a listening tour. And they want to know what makes Maine important to you. So hopefully you will join us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laura, and have a great night. Stay healthy, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.